Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Vertica Unify 2021. I'm Steve Sarsfield on the partner marketing team at Vertica, and I'm the host of this breakout session. We've got a special two-part session this hour. In part one, there's a session entitled Analytics at Jaguar Racing, driven by Vertica. And joining me for part one is Mark Wally from Vertica, who will be taking us through a very interesting case study involving the Jaguar Racing team. You may have seen Phil Charles in Tuesday's keynote talking about this use case, and Mark will dive a little deeper into what's happening at Jaguar Racing. And then in part two, we'll hear from Mark Guerrero from Dell EMC, and in this session, it's entitled Leveraging Vertica in Eon Mode with Dell EMC ECS Object Storage. Dell EMC is a platinum sponsor of Vertica Unify, and we're thankful for their partnership. Before I begin, I encourage you to submit questions during the virtual session. You don't have to wait, just enter your questions into the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll get to the Q&A at the end of the session, or actually during the break, and then at the end of the session. We'll answer as many questions as possible during that time, and if there are any questions that we can't get to, we'll do our best to answer them offline. Now remember that this virtual session is being recorded, and it will be available to you on demand this week, and we'll send you a notification when it's ready. Please stick around for the code at the end that we give you at the end of the session, and you can use it to gain points and participate in our Analyze to Win competition to win prizes. Now let's begin with part one. Over to you, Mark Wally.
Analytics at Jaguar Racing Speed, driven by Vertica. Phil Charles, technical manager of Jaguar Racing, talked about his passion for Formula E during his keynote. How the Vertica team have been working closely with Jaguar race engineers since the start of Season 7 of the ABB Formula E World Championship to deliver hugely improved data-driven performance both on and off the racetrack. My name is Mark Worley, manager of Vertica Education. Though just to confuse issues, as well as being passionate about Vertica, being UK-based and loving to take on new challenges and projects. When asked if I would like to work with the Jaguar Racing Formula E team, I naturally jumped at that chance. Prior to Vertica's engagement with Jaguar Racing as their official analytics technical partner, they were restrained by their legacy analytics database solution. Slow at loading data, having to downsample and aggregate data prior to loading, a limited number of analytical functions, simple reports taking tens of minutes to produce, were just some of the problems faced by Jaguar Racing. Addressing the challenges of loading huge quantities of data and making it immediately available to race engineers to glean meaningful insights to the data, and to do so at lightning speed should not be underestimated. Thankfully, with Vertica, these problems are a thing of the past. However, the challenges do not stop there. Race weekends are held in cities around the world. Season 7 covering Saudi Arabia to Mexico and many locations in between. With limited numbers of race engineers allowed at the trackside and in their UK-based headquarters, and extremely limited and flaky network connections from those remote locations, how do you get that data quickly and efficiently from the car's data loggers and into the hands of those who need to make split-second decisions between, for example, the qualifying and Super Pole and the actual race? In February of this year, and with the support of Iomart, we built and deployed our initial 3-node enterprise mode Vertica cluster, management console, Windows Server, and Apache Kafka broker. But why did we choose Iomart? They are a UK-based infrastructure specialist with whom we have been working closely for several years. They are extremely responsive and have provided us with a whole raft of servers in support of our Vertica Academy, where we currently have 17 bare metal servers supporting coming up to 500 virtual machines and other resources. They were the natural choice for us to deploy an environment for the Jaguar Racing Vertica ecosystem, as we knew we could provision it extremely quickly and with minimal fuss. But what I forgot to mention, and the reason I'm speaking in this breakout session, is that all of those bare metal servers are supplied by Dell. Although initially a relatively small deployment, we currently have Vertica Enterprise Mode running over a series of 3 Dell PowerEdge servers, each running 20-core dual Xeon E5 2600 CPUs, 128 gigabytes of memory, 250 gigabytes of RAID 1 SSDs for the operating system, and 6 2-terabyte SATA hard drives for the Vertica database. To ensure high-speed internode communications, we have provisioned a 10 gig network switch and a 1 gig WAN connection. As the Windows Server and Apache Kafka broker require far less resources, we have provisioned a single Dell PowerEdge server running VMware's ESXi hypervisor. The final piece of the jigsaw in this initial deployment is the provisioning of a Dell ECS object store. In its current configuration, this provides us with our daily Vertica database backups and as a staging post for moving around some of the larger files. Thankfully, with the highly resilient Dell PowerEdge servers and their locally attached storage, we have not yet needed to perform a single database restore, though knowing it is there and always online gives us that warm, comfortable feeling. As well as knowing we have all of the resources available and dedicated to us from those Dell PowerEdge servers, having iDRAC access has meant we have an even greater control over how we can set up, configure, and manage the environment. Though noting Iomart also offer a fully managed service should we or Jaguar Racing want to go down that route. As indicated, this is our initial deployment in support of Jaguar Racing. We are only just halfway through Season 7 and have already captured 100 billion data points from track testing, car simulator, and race weekends. Data lands in Vertica within seconds and is immediately available to the race engineers to garner those valuable insights and make adjustments to the powertrain, suspension, steering, braking, and power management. Jaguar Racing are now doing things with Vertica that were just not possible with the incumbent database system. They get to access all the raw data, not just an aggregated subset. They get to query data from every track test, simulator, and race weekend, not just for a single event. They get to use 700 plus in-database functions, rather than needing to export data to another analytics tool. And they get to see the results in milliseconds rather than the tens of minutes. What may be coming up in the future? By its very nature, Formula E has periods where there would be huge demands on analytics, typically over race weekends. There will also be times when demand may be less so. Such a pattern of varying workloads for processing capability naturally fits Vertica's Eon mode. As such, should we in time decide to transition from Enterprise to Eon mode, having already established an enterprise cluster and are already using Dell's ECS object store for the database backups, would make this move a far simpler step. Although Jaguar Racing made use of a small number of our in-database functions, such as gap filling and interpolation and sessionization, we have proven how easy it is to build a user-defined function. For this, there was a requirement to provide a low-pass filter to smooth out the noise in a series of sensor signals. Developed in just a few lines of Python code, this function now sits inside the Vertica database and is available just like any of the other 700 plus in-database functions as part of our powerful SQL dialect. Again, no need to export huge quantities of data to an external application to filter the data. As we always say, move the processing to the data, not the other way around. Then you can work on all of the data and at speed using Vertica. To date, Jaguar Racing have made huge improvements in running their analytics and reporting using Vertica. However, they have only just touched the surface on what they would like to do in the future. We are already talking to the team about the full end-to-end life cycle of machine learning and predictive analytics, an area where we are sure Jaguar Racing will see huge potential to deliver that edge over the competition, to ultimately win more points, podiums, and wins for Jaguar Racing. All in all, we believe Jaguar Racing love what they see, driven by Vertica. In my introduction, I mentioned how excited I was to be involved with Jaguar Racing and Formula E. Sadly, due to COVID-19, the closest I get to see a race car is the one I built myself and get a 3D printed image of me sitting in the driving seat. Thank you. And now back to Steve.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to see that scalability and elasticity in play, especially in a safe and secure environment. So thank you for those case studies. Now, before we get to part 2 with Dell EMC, let's take a few questions. Yeah, and Mark, what I really like is the fact that you kind of gave us 2 case studies there. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit more about each of those. In the Jaguar case study, I was curious about the kind of data that you're capturing now. And is there any opportunity for you to expand the scope of the data captured? It seems like today it's a lot of time series data, right? And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So, today we're capturing car sensor data, approximately 500 million data points per car per session, and that's for tests, practice lap sessions, qualifying, and races. The data so covers hundreds of metrics which are related to the tires, the brakes, wheels, transmission, power consumption, regen, and of course many, many more. Currently, there's no plans to sort of expand the scope of the data that we capture, but maybe we'll include such data as weather observations, forecasts, and climate data, and so forth in the future.
Yeah, sounds great. And that would really fit into our unified platform storage, right? We can take different sources and put them together. Any thoughts on the types of analytics? Is there predictive analytics involved? What kind of machine learning, predictive analytics things are Jaguar Racing doing?
I suppose one of the obvious is predictive analytics is component failure. It's obviously far better to identify and replace a faulty component before it breaks, especially if it's going to happen during a race. So during season 7, we've been concentrating on perfecting the loading of data and replacing the incumbent database technology. So it's enabling Jaguar to get their hands on all of the data to perform that in data analytics inside the database. I say something that they were unable to do or restricted by their legacy systems. But between season 7, which is just over coming towards its ends now, and season 8, which starts in January next year, I expect there to be a huge push forwards with providing even more in-depth analytics, together with machine learning and predictive analytics to go with that.
Yeah, a couple of great questions from the audience, so thank you for that. Smoothing out the noise and the sensor data is now a function within Vertica that could be used to move the process of the data. I would call this a unified analytics function. And what are some of the other functions that we routinely brought to where the data resides? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, well, obviously, as I said, we've got, as those who know Vertica well, know that we have 700 plus in database functions, and although you're not going to use all of those by a long shot, they are clearly using things like gap filling, interpolation, sessionalization, and such like, all time series type requirements there. There was that one requirement, as alluded to, where they discovered a business requirement to smooth out the data using what is commonly known as a low pass filter, for which we didn't have a similar function inside the database. And that's where we, as I said, developed in a few lines of Python code a UDX which does just that, and that now sits inside the database. And it demonstrated to them that we have all the functions available, or many functions available, out of the box, but where there's not something there, we can so easily deploy something to put it inside the database, removing that need to extract data and process it in an external application. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely want to get into part B of this presentation. One last question, though, before we move into part B. You mentioned the 500 virtual machines for Vertica Academy. Tell me a little bit about that, and what are those machines used for?
Yeah, absolutely. The Vertica Academy, for those who don't know, was set up just under 2 years ago to deliver online self-paced training to anybody who wants to take that. And a number of our courses that we have on there, including such things like quick tips and short courses and so forth, are certification courses. And we feel that to do justice to certification courses, we need to enable the students to be able to do hands-on exercises. And to that end, we could have asked them to install maybe Community Edition on their laptops or so forth, but that would just take extra time, effort on their behalf. So we provide them with a 3-node Vertica cluster virtual machine environment for the duration of their certification course, and it works very well. It's a great tool for them.
Great. Well, there's a lot of interest in what's going on in Vertica Academy and what's going on in Jaguar Racing. But I do want to get to part B. So let's transition now to part B of the presentation. All right, let's switch over to part 2 of this presentation. We will hear from Mark Herrera from Dell EMC, and he's going to be talking about Vertica and Eon mode and empowered by Dell Technologies. Over to you, Mark.
Hello, and thank you for joining the breakout session today. This is Mark Herrera, Global Field CTO, covering object storage at Dell Technologies. And I wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about how ECS supports that environment for operational recovery. First of all, just to give you some background, ECS is a Dell technology product that provides an on-premise object storage solution that is accessed via an AWS S3 compliant API. So you could think of it as a private AWS S3 instance that you run, own, and manage in your data centers. In these environments, ECS is installed inside of your data centers, as I mentioned, either a single or multi-data center environment. All nodes sit behind a global load balancer, and it exposes a S3 bucket where data is written into. Once the data is written into ECS, ECS will protect it through erasure coded locally. And this protects against drive or node failure, and then replicate it in the background to a secondary data center for site resilience. This is really critical to ensure that if the environment needs to be restored from an accidental delete or some corruption, it's able to be recovered and not be impacted by failure on the ECS side. For customers using ECS for backup, the goals are fairly simple. One is deploy a cost-effective solution to match or beat public cloud costs. Second, they want to deploy a solution that scales linear for capacity and for performance. And 3, they want to ensure the environment is very simple to manage, regardless of the size and number of locations. And ECS provides all of these capabilities. In terms of scalability, as load increases into the Vertica database, the Vertica backup application will continually increase the number of concurrent threads. And the nice thing, ECS aligns to meet that load. Each node can handle up to 1,000 concurrent connections and scales as you add nodes. So as you add more nodes, you get more concurrent connections, you get more capacity as well. So you're really scaling for capacity and performance to meet the demands of the application. In addition, great to be able to back up quickly, but certainly when you want to restore, you need to be able to restore quickly. And we tend to see less threads being generated for a restore operation. But the beauty of ECS is that the reads are actually about 2 times faster than the writes. So on a restore operation, ECS will allow an end user to get back up and running quickly after an issue has been discovered. Let me take a minute to dive a bit deeper into ECS. ECS was developed internally at Dell as our third generation object storage platform and has been generally available since 2014. With 19 plus years of object storage experience, ECS has grown and is recognized as a leader in its space. With over 3,000 customers and over 3 exabytes installed in production, you can be sure ECS is ready to take on your application needs. One of the key design principles that ECS provides is choice. You can purchase ECS as an appliance, which contains all the hardware and software required to run the solution, or just ECS software and run it on your commodity hardware. Or you can start with one option and grow the environment with the other, so you can mix and match an appliance and or software only nodes. For the appliance, we have 3 node options. The first, which aligns to the backup use case, is our archive node, which provides over 11 petabytes raw in a rack. Each node can support 45 drives to start, and then can grow to 90. So you could start small and grow large. You can also start a rack with 5 nodes, and then you can scale up to 16 nodes. So again, you could right-size the deployment to meet your initial and grow as your capacity needs increase, but still stay within a large footprint. And then beyond that, you could scale racks up to hundreds of nodes inside of a data center. Then we have what we call a standard node option, which is kind of our mid-tier, which is a balance between performance and economics, as it still uses hard disk drives, but it has a beefier footprint in terms of memory and CPU. This node starts with 12 drives and can scale up to 24 drives, so not as dense as the archive node, but still gives you a good amount of capacity per node. Similar, it starts with 5 nodes per rack and scales up to 16 in that same rack. Both allow you to continue to grow beyond the rack to hundreds of nodes per site, as I mentioned previously. And then for ultra performance, we have our all-flash NVMe node, which also utilizes NVMe over Fabric protocol for node-to-node communication to deliver extreme performance and low latency, and allows you to take full advantage of the hardware it runs on. As noted, EXF900, which is our all-flash node, has been tested to be 25 times faster than our smallest entry node, which was the EX300. And similar to the mid-tier appliance, you have a 12-drive starting point, and you can expand to 24 drives, and starts with 5 nodes and grows into 16 nodes. And again, you can mix and match all of these solutions into separate pools to ensure you have the appropriate SLA. Deeper about what comes in the appliance. Basically everything you need to run ECS. It includes an optional Dell rack, and then inside of the rack, the nodes, which are Dell PowerEdge servers, which has the CPU, memory, drives, and network to run the ECS software. We have networking switches, highly available for front-end and back-end networks, and an optional local and global load balancer. So as for a customer, all they have to do is provide the floor space, some power for the rack, and a few network ports to uplink the rack. And then Dell provides the rest. Another benefit of the appliance model is that 100% of the components, including the software, is supported by Dell. So you have a single number to call for support that is available 24/7/365 and provides enterprise-grade support for a worry-free environment. So the hardware is interesting, and again, it's built on the Dell PowerEdge server line, which gives us a ton of engineering resources and capabilities to deploy additional node types or upgrades of existing nodes as the PowerEdge line changes. But let's spend a few minutes on the software, which is really the value add of ECS. As noted prior, ECS provides a scaled architecture. As you add nodes, you add resources to increase transactions and throughput, and also the capacity behind those nodes. ECS provides an active-active global namespace across nodes within a location, and more importantly, across data centers. This also comes with strong consistencies. So regardless of the node or the site you request the data, ECS guarantees the latest copy. And this is critical when you want to restore to a previous copy to restore your database after some operational impact, and or if you're running in EON mode, it would provide the ability to ensure that any request from the application has the latest copy of data, regardless, again, from which site it makes the request. ECS is multi-tenant from the ground up, where tenants can be aligned to physical nodes or logical partitions on a shared deployment model. ECS also provides role-based administration on the tenant level, which then allows each admin or tenant admin to control their environment. Things like setting quotas, hard and soft, also requiring data at rest encryption to be enabled, or even retention for compliant workloads. So as a tenant admin, you have a lot of control over your environment, and then there's the system administrator that deals with things like expansion and code upgrades and things like that. So you get a nice mix of capabilities. All data, including tiny bite-sized objects, are erasure coded, first mirrored, which allows you to manage your overhead more efficiently. So this is what we call small file efficiency, regardless of the size of the object. This is possible with an internal container construct that combines these smaller objects together in what we call chunks. This allows ECS to scale and support billions of objects without concern over data consistency and recovery from failed drives and nodes, because we're recovering things on larger sizes versus these tiny objects. And then we're also doing these background jobs, scan jobs for data consistency against the chunk versus the tiny objects. So it provides scale and efficiency without additional operational overheads. You don't have to worry about the number of objects inside the system or the number of objects per bucket and things like that. You just create a bucket, two or many, and then load the system to fill. Beyond 2 sites, ECS becomes more efficient. So this is where the global namespace construct becomes important, where you can reduce the overhead to protect against site failure by using the GeoXOR algorithm. This allows you to reduce the overhead, the raw overhead, from 2 sites to 3 sites with a 25% reduction. And it keeps getting more efficient as you go up to 8 sites, which is the maximum number of sites you can have in a global namespace, but it keeps getting more efficient as you add sites. Writes are always persisted locally versus across the WAN, which provides multi-site efficiency without increased write and read latency and multiple WAN round trips to get your data. So you have efficiency, low overhead without creating complex policies for mirroring or erasure coding, and then you get a guaranteed latency because the data is protected locally, and then the optimization happens through the XOR algorithm. All the nodes within or across sites are managed under a single pane of glass. This includes the multiple tenants. So if you have 8 sites with 10 tenants per, instead of having 10 management consoles or multiple screens, you could actually log into a single pane from any node inside of the system and get a global view of the system. So tied to ensure the highest level SLAs, ECS uses the same dial home software and the same remote and on-site customer service team that all the Dell products use today, which is again 24/7/365. So if there is a issue, the remote team can dial in and take action immediately. If there's an issue, hardware can be sent or a customer service representative can be dispatched to be on site. For mixed environments, ECS also supports built-in metadata search for system and custom metadata tags. So as you're writing data into the system, you can tag your data with custom tags and you can do searches internally. Now this wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for EON or enterprise mode, but certainly if you have a mixed environment, you can certainly use ECS for other applications, and this would allow for data insights inside of the system. And as Mark mentioned, if you're doing some staging outside of the database, you certainly can take advantage of this feature. ECS also includes ubiquitous multi-protocol access to the same data set. So we've been talking about S3 certainly is what the backup application consumes through enterprise mode and what EM mode would also use. But we also support CIFS and NFS on the system. So you can certainly write data through S3, and if there's some legacy applications that only support NFS, you can certainly read that data through NFS and then also through CIFS. And for our Hadoop big data workloads, but ECS is also certified with Cloudera to support the S3A drivers, so the Apache S3A drivers. So again, nice ability to use ECS not only for Vertica, but for other workloads. So let's come back to Vertica and ECS. The great news is ECS is now certified to run as communal storage for Vertica in EON mode. As Mark Wally mentioned, a number of customers are running in enterprise mode and they're considering moving to EON mode. And this allows you to think about ECS as that communal storage. And the first thing that you are likely asking is has it been certified? And the answer is yes, it's been certified. In our labs, we ran 6 physical servers with the Vertica software against an 8-node EX500, which is our middle tier node. The test included a scale portion where we scaled the number of clients, and then it also tested with cache on, which is depot on, and cache off, depot off, just to ensure that the system could return the results. Although Vertica and Dell both recommend the depot being on, so cache being enabled, especially for the EX500. As you know, if you're running enterprise mode, as Mark mentioned, all of the storage is held locally within inside of a node, whether that's local disk or local attached storage. And as you move to EON mode, the ECS becomes a tier of storage, which Vertica calls communal storage. So all of the user data actually gets moved into ECS, and then a portion based on the cache management is kept in hot and cache storage that is local to the disk. And as I mentioned, the nice thing is the existing investment you have in the ECS archive node still can play a role with Vertica and running in EON mode, because you still need operational recovery storage. So you can use ECS, in this case the X500 for communal storage, and then you could use the archive node for the backups. And the great thing is you can combine these two pools of storage under a single cluster and manage it as one, just as separate tenants. So you ensure that each portion of the workload has its SLA to meet the requirements. And for customers that are concerned about sizing the cache correctly or explosive growth that may overrun cache, we do have another option. As I mentioned, ECS is really built around having a number of options to provide choice for customer. You can utilize the all-flash EXF900, again, which is much faster for the communal storage. So you do have choice. You can use our standard node, you can use our all-flash node for communal, and then certainly our archive node. And all of your options can be managed under a single pane of glass as multiple tenants inside of the system. So Vertica and ECS better together. If we think about the design principles of the EON node and the benefits it provides to customers, they align fairly well with the ECS benefits design principles. They both scale linearly. As you add workload to EON, you can add additional ECS nodes to meet the demand. There's a concept of tenancy in EON mode, so you can isolate workloads to ensure that no workload steps on another workload. As I mentioned before, there's a concept of multi-tenancy inside of ECS where you can isolate the nodes into pools or tenants and then align the EON workloads to those tenants. If we do have the requirement to share workloads against a single pool or a single tenant inside of ECS, ECS does provide the ability to set up quality of service rules to ensure that those two applications that are sharing an environment do not step on each other. So there's certainly a match made to align workload, expansion, and tenancy together. And as we go into the future, ECS is looking at its software capabilities and next-gen design constructs. And in version 4, which will be renamed or rebranded into object scale, we are refactoring ECS to run on Kubernetes. And secondly, we are taking our monolith application and breaking that into microservices. So as an application owner or even a storage admin, you can right-size the microservices to meet the application load. And you could tune that through scaling up or down as the application demands change. And the real beauty of having both applications moving towards a software stack that can run on Kubernetes is we can co-locate not only the object scale software, but the Vertica software on a common Kubernetes cluster, utilizing different resources inside of shared nodes, hopefully Dell PowerEdge servers, which gives you cloud scale capabilities, but on premise. So you get the best of cloud, but you own your environment. And now we'll move to the Q&A session. I'll send it back to Steve, and thank you very much for joining the breakout session.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's great to hear that the Vertica platform does work well in Eon mode test. It works on your communal storage, works on the backup cluster systems. So thank you very much. I look forward to working with you on the Kubernetes stuff. So that's something to really look forward to in the future. So let's take a few questions now.
Servers, which gives you cloud scale capabilities, but on premise. So you get the best of cloud, but you own your environment. And now we'll move to the Q&A session. I'll send it back to Steve, and thank you very much for joining the breakout session.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's great to hear that the Vertica platform does work well in Eon mode test. It works on your communal storage, works on the backup cluster systems. So thank you very much. I look forward to working with you on the Kubernetes stuff. So that's something to really look forward to in the future. So let's take a few questions now. Yeah, great. They're coming in, and I appreciate that presentation, Mark. This is a question that I've always wanted to ask, and this comes in from the audience. How does object store differ from file store or block store or network virtual disk or network virtual systems? Can you shed any light? I think you're probably a good person to ask this question to, Mark.
Yeah, so if you think about block storage, you've dedicated storage for the node itself. So that's owned by a node or a cluster of nodes. File store is shared storage over the network, and it organizes things with folders and directories, but it's primarily a active passive system. So you have something local, and then you can replicate it to a secondary site, and if you need to access that, you fail over to that site. Object store really kind of brings a couple things. One, it's accessible over HTTP. It's primarily access through a set of APIs and RESTful in nature, where it's a set of verbs. I'm going to put something in, I'm going to get something out, and we really eliminate the size of the storage system. There's really no limit in the total capacity or the total objects we could store inside of systems, and then we actually make it into a global namespace. So not only across nodes within a location, but across locations. So if I have 3 or 4 or 10 sites, I can stitch those together and then expose a bucket, which is a folder in a sense. And I can store data in and retrieve it from that bucket.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a difference in APIs and maybe a little bit in the underlying technology itself. Yeah, great. Yeah. So just a question about sort of if customers have a lot of Dell equipment now, how hard is it to leverage what they have made in the past to move over to a new sort of object store based system?
Yeah, so it really depends on how you acquire the ECS solution. If we're selling an appliance, we'll ship a rack or a set of nodes that's built on PowerEdge, but you would add that to your existing environment. We certainly do have the ability to sell software only. So if you had a set of PowerEdge servers, some 40XD, we can, and they're not in use, we could actually install the ECS software and then consume those assets.
Great. Perfect. You mentioned that Vertica and Eon mode helps with the noisy neighbor problem. I don't think that's a big problem from what I see in some of the other presentations, but what's your role in that?
Yeah, so if you think about noisy neighbors, and Vertica probably does a pretty good job of controlling multiple workloads inside of the database. But if you think about the traditional deployment of an object store, it's usually for multiple use cases. So Vertica Eon mode plus something else. And the concern when you mix those workloads is, having one step on another. So we can separate those into tenants, which can be isolated at the node level, or we could share node levels and then do things at the namespace level, and then set quality of service policies to ensure that the appropriate resources are delivered to the application of choice. And then one would not step on another. That even includes your storage quotas, so we're not going to let one consume all of the disk space versus the other.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, great. I think let me just take one further check here. Yeah, no. Okay, great. Some additional questions that we'll answer after the fact when it comes to the Jaguar use case. But I think that's all the questions that we have for today. And thank you, audience, for your participation. If we weren't able to get to the questions, obviously we will respond afterwards. And any questions on this about Eon mode, our developers are available in the developer lounge. Of course, a replay will be available. Slides will be available after the fact. And don't forget our Analyze to Win code, which I have to give you right now. The Analyze to Win code is Golden Doodle. Looks like Golden Doodle, one word. Make sure you enter that. So this really concludes this breakout session. Have a great day and enjoy Vertica Unify.